not a lawyer, and we'll get it. Well, but there is a very pressing issue going on now in Iraq. What are your thoughts on it, Richard?
Well, listen, I think this is the president loses on any situation here, and I think people like our friend there from Breitbart will attack this president no matter what he does. The truth of the matter is this: we shouldn't have gotten the war in Iraq to begin with, and now it is time for the people of Iraq and the government of Iraq to finally stand up and deal with their own mess. And I think if we're going to provide support as a country, that support can only come after Iraq figures out exactly what it's going to do.
Ben? Well, okay, there are really three separate questions when it comes to Iraq. Should we have gotten in? Should we have gotten out? And what do we do now? Right, and the first two questions are actually sort of irrelevant to the third. Meaning, I hear the argument we shouldn't have gotten in the first place. Certainly, getting out looks like a mistake now that there's a massive chaotic situation over there. In terms of the third solution, doing nothing and saying that, oh well, throwing up our hands, well, I guess what happens there happens there. That's a pre-9/11 mentality that suggests that whatever happens there is a regional problem and we'll never have any blowback here.
What should you do?
What we should do is we should put military advisors on the ground, particularly in Kurdistan, where we help out some of the folks who actually want to defend the country. And look, if we actually care about the status of the country, the last thing we should be doing is helping the Iranians invade the southern half of the country and then helping the Sunnis invade the northern half of the country. This is exactly what the left wanted with regard to Iraq way back in the middle of the last decade. They wanted this to turn into Vietnam. Vietnam was a war that was won until we cut funding and pulled out. And this was also a war that was won until we cut funding and pulled out.
Go ahead, Richard.
Larry, that's utterly, completely not true. Right? And if you listen to folks like John McCain, who always believes we should arm the rebels, which is his solution to everything, and putting our men and women in harm's way once again to solve a quagmire of a situation that we've created. Let's be very clear about this. It was created under George W. Bush. This president has brought our men and women back home in the safety of America, and now we've got to figure out a solution. And to be honest with you, this government, the Iraqi government, has got to stand up. This cannot always be America's nightmare. The Iraqi government has to stand up and say, we're going to take control. What the president of Iraq needs to do is reach out to the Sunnis, reach out to the Shias, make concessions, and find a way to run his government. We do it here in America. They do it in India. They do it in Pakistan. They do it all across the world. People come together, different factions come together and rule a country equally. And this president, the president of Iraq, hasn't been able to do that. And he has to be held accountable for his actions before we put our men and women back in harm's way.
Why is it our problem?
It's our problem because, to a certain extent,
because we invaded them.
Well, yes, because we invaded them, but also beyond that, because once we're there and you make promises to people who are now being mowed down in the streets, by the way, if you feel no moral obligation about that, but you feel a moral obligation about 270 girls who get kidnapped by Boko Haram in Nigeria, then I question where exactly your moral feelings lie. Because the fact is, tens of thousands of people are going to get killed there. Certainly hundreds of thousands have already been moved into exile, essentially.
You want to send advisors.
I certainly want to send advisors.
What else do you want? Advisors.
Airstrikes on ISIS. Airstrikes. We can airstrike Gaddafi's forces in Libya, in a country we have nothing to do with, but we won't airstrike ISIS?
Don't go away. The debate continues with Ben and Richard right after this. What's wrong with that, Richard? Why not airstrike?
Well, listen, I think I would like for him to define what military advisors mean. One, because we've already trained the Iraqi military, and it's not our fault the Iraqi military is surrendering as fast as possible, right? That's not our issue. That's not our problem. Now, where I do agree with him is I think that I have no problem, I think this president has no problem with some sort of drone warfare, sending some drones over there to strike ISIS. But with that being said, we need a solution where all the parties are at the table. And unfortunately, that can only happen when the Iraqi government stands up here.
Well, that also happens, actually, and was happening when the American military was there. I mean, if you read the pieces in The New Yorker by a great reporter who's actually on the left, he was talking in specific detail about the fact that when the U.S. military was there, they were speaking every day with Maliki,
so
and they were telling him.
How long would you want the U.S. military to be there is the question.
If the U.S. military there is there for decades, we can live.
How long do you want our men and women to be put in harm's way?
Let me ask you this: how many American men and women were you willing to let die for no reason now? Because now the country is gone, right? So you got 4,500 American men and women who died there, and their blood is worth nothing because the country is gone. And veterans are saying this.
No. Wait a minute. Well, first of all, we shouldn't have been there in the first place. And
well, you can argue that, but the bottom line is, once the war was won, why give it back?
How much more American blood do you want to shed for a conflict that is not our conflict, and a government that is literally irresponsible?
Don't you think the American public will not support troops on the ground? You know that.
I think at this point you're probably right. The American public will not support troops on the ground by a wide margin, because this has become a country that has now slipped into a pre-9/11 mentality, which is why we are now going to surrender Afghanistan back to the Taliban and Iraq to a combined force of Al-Qaeda/ISIS in the north and Iran in the south.
All right, some other political things. Your reaction to the defeat of Mr. Cantor?